Thank you for the kind introduction there, and I want to thank Chairman Kassar and my local chairman, Bill Beckman, and I got a lot of friends in this room, but you guys are carrying on Mike Long's legacy, which is great, and that's very important to me. And the great thing about being here is, even though you're all friends, to be in Albany at 2 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon for this, you are not normal people. So when we go through the slides, don't think of yourself as like normal, all right? There's 13 million other New York voters who are not here today, so they're the ones who are not normal. And Tom Dunham gave a very nice introduction, a lot of pressure, best pollster in America. It's like, that's like a really low bar. But it's like, but you know, the good part about Tom is, I just read the surveys and say, okay, this is what we should do. He then has to get the candidate to do the ads that they put up on digital, and then you got to move the votes. You got to put up the TV ads. And what was good was he makes the pollster look good, because one example, Anthony D'Esposito in New York 4. We had an ad that he started out in August. We took our first general election poll. He was down 10 points. And then I'm like, we have to make Laura Gillen responsible for cashless bail. We have to go at her and draw a contrast right away. We can't leave her with a lead. And but the next time I took a poll, Anthony was up by a point, and we didn't look back. So it's really, you know, you're only as good as the candidates and the team that you work for. And you know, there was an article in the New York Times. Nate Cohen is this 538 guru in the New York Times. And he was talking about the gold standard of pollsters in this New York Times. He wrote it Friday, if you want to look up about pollsters and how he rated them. None of the gold standard of pollsters had Donald Trump winning in 2016. But I guess they're the gold standard again, because those of us who do likely voters, who take more time in surveys, I guess they're going to bring back the liberal bias polls against us. And with that, it's like, and Trump he loves to hear about polls. One story I like to tell about Trump was that 2016, after he won the election, calls me like 2 days before Christmas, and he says, I just want to thank you again for that huge win. And I said to him, well, at least we didn't make you pay for a landslide. And he says, no, it was a huge win. And I said, no, you only won by 78,000 votes out of 139 million, so I thank you for that. And it's like, it was close. We could have lost. And he's like, no, but it was a big electoral win. And I said, no, not really that much. Obama had more electoral votes when he got elected. So I hear this silence on the other end of the phone. And I said, what it was a historic victory. And because we're kind of back to this time where I said, you beat the Republican establishment, you beat the Washington establishment, and no one has ever done that in the history of the United States since maybe Andrew Jackson. And he says, yeah, 1838. I said, no, it was 1828. But when I went to the Oval Office, next to his desk, there was a picture of Andrew Jackson behind him. To which I'm like thinking, thank God I didn't tell this guy he won 2 duels. But I don't want, before I get into the slides of how to do polling, we're going to make you all pollsters today. 45 minutes and you'll all be really good at it. At least better than Nate Cohen's gold standard liberal pollsters. But I want to take out a pen. I want everybody to do a little exercise first before we do this. And hopefully I give the right instructions that you can use. Write down the month of your birthday. So I was born in June, so I'd write down 6. Okay, write that number down. Then add to it the number of the next month. One caveat, if you were born in December, it's 12 plus 13. Don't go back to 1 for January. So like I was born in June, so I'll add 6 plus 7. Everybody got that? You got a sum there, right? All right, 6 plus 7, whatever your birthday is, whatever that number birthday of the month is to the next month. And if you're in December, add it to 13. Take that number, multiply it by 5. All right, so take that number that you have there, multiply it by 10. Okay? add to it the day of the month you were born. So I was born like on the 10th of the month, so I would add that number to that total. Bring out a total. Okay? Subtract, the last one was, so the last one was add the day of the month that you were born. So I was born on the 10th, June 10th, so 10, I would add 10 to that. So you have a new sum. Subtract 50, subtract 50. How many people have their birthday in front of them? How many people don't? Anybody don't? Because if you didn't do it right, you can't ask me a question. But if you do that exercise properly every time, it's a sure thing you'll have the right numbers. The thing I'm going to tell you about polling is I have an MBA in quantitative methods. There are no sure things in polling. There's a margin of error you'll hear pollsters talk about, but there's no sure things. Let's go to the first slide, next slide. Next slide. Who's doing the slides? Do I do them? Could be dangerous. What do I point it at? Oh, look at that. I made it work. That's good. This is my favorite quote. Lincoln didn't have a pollster, I don't think. But he said public opinion in this country is everything. He knew to win a war, he needed public opinion on his side. To win elections, we certainly do. A lot of times we go in, my brother Jim and I are partners in our polling firm, and there's people that work for us. We go in and we always hear, why do I have to poll? You know, and I can hear Trump asking me this question. I know this better than any pollster. I don't need a poll to tell me what to think. I never used a poll before and I won. What do they know? Polls cost too much. I'd rather buy bumper stickers and lawn signs. Volunteers can do it. Polling questions are always biased. There's lots of public polls out there. I mean, would you build a building without an architect and an engineer? No. Would you fly a plane without radar? No. But this is what a poll does for you. There's 3 phases in a campaign. Resource accumulation, that's from now until you start spending money or start spending resources to persuade people to vote for you, because the second part is persuasion. The third part is what I call ballots. Republicans still call it get out the vote. There's no such thing as get out the vote on election day. It's now election month, it's election week. We have early voting. I tell you, there's people that I've worked with in this room, and I would not be here as a winning pollster in New York without having my candidates say, we're going to get as many absentees as the Democrats. And that was after they mailed out the whole state for Democrats. And I have candidates and organizations who decided to beat the Democrats every day on early voting. And Nassau and Suffolk counties do that. I mean, Nassau County does that. Because then on election day, back in 2021, Bruce Blakeman was one of the Nassau County executive. When I got the 9 o'clock reports on Bruce Blakeman's county, the turnout reports from the Nassau County Republicans at 9 a.m., there were more Republicans than Democrats. I said, if you keep this going all day, Bruce Blakeman will be county executive. Because in these polls, a lot of times we find out that in 2020, when we were asking about people that voted early during COVID, they voted for Democrats 2-1. People that vote on election day vote for Republicans 2-1. So you got to win the middle, try to mitigate what the Democrats are doing. And Tom talked about Pennsylvania. They have this Act 77 that the Republicans passed because they didn't want to look bad during COVID. Stupidity. It's stupid. They legalized ballot harvesting. And the Democrats and the Union Labor. When Oz debated Fetterman in Pennsylvania, there was already 1 million votes and they have registration. So there was 1 million votes cast before that debate, and basically the mail-in votes, he was losing 500,000-600,000 votes. So he started the race on election day, losing by that margin. Really hard to make up. So the Conservative Party can be an engine, is to make sure we compete with the Democrats on absentee ballots and what we call ballots. Campaign resources. There's a candidate, and a lot of times there's candidates that aren't known, there's candidates that are known. If Donald Trump and I got in the race against each other, there'd be a big difference. Organization. Organization is not just the number of people you have working for you, it's the quality of people you have working for you. Money you can never have enough of, but whatever you have, you need to spend better than your opponents. And a lot of times, the Conservative Party, we have candidates that we endorse, we get outspent. But we have to be smarter, we have to be better, we have to spend our resources better. Time, that's the one thing Donald Trump and I'd have in common if we got in the race today, if I joined the race for president. It's the only thing we'd have in common. And time, we need to spend our days better, more efficiently. Doesn't mean you work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. The candidate will get tired, make a mistake. Instead, what it really means is we got to use our time more effectively, which goes to the fifth resource, information. Polling is the resource that makes those other four resources work well. If you haven't done a poll, you have no idea where to go, you have no idea how to build your organization, you have no idea to spend your money, you're guessing, and you have no idea where to spend your time in the race. But when you take a poll, a lot of candidates, I'll tell them, just take the benchmark poll. And a lot of times, too, I tell candidates, you got to take the poll before you announce, see if you have a chance. And, and they'll like think about it, and then they'll say, nah, I want to spend all this money to get the poll numbers up. I've had candidates do that. I had a candidate for Congress do it once in Oklahoma, and I came back, he was losing badly. And I said, let me see the ad you ran. It was a horrible ad. And then I said to him, the good part is no one really knows you, but those people that know you are voting against you. So anyway, but the campaign organization, this is where the polling helps you. In research, you have opposition research, you have candidate vulnerability research, you have pure issues research, you have research about all the elites in your district, the VIPs politically, who can help you, who can endorse you, the coalitions, et cetera. Polling fits in that group because you're going to poll to figure out how to win. Earned media, that's when you get free press, and it could be anything from digital to traditional mainstream media. Fundraising, every day you got to be raising money. Political organization, without a doubt you build your conservative Republican organization. Special groups, coalitions, those are the people that are outside the political organization but can help you, like law enforcement, veterans, gun owners, pro-lifers, et cetera. Scheduling, I used to work for Arthur Finkelstein, and he used to have a saying, the first person fired in every campaign is the first scheduler, and the second person fired is the second scheduler, because you have to schedule efficiently the candidate. And the last thing is paid media when you're raising money, digital, social, and the legacy media on TV, cable, et cetera. Next slide. This is why you take a poll. You take a poll because you want to get, and people that I've worked with, candidates that I've worked with, like Congressman Williams, Congressman Esposito, et cetera, I'll be asking 40, 50 questions, sometimes 60 questions. Why do you want to ask a poll that long? Well, I have to ask a poll that long to find out what's going to work. Because the first thing every candidate will ask you is, what are my chances of winning? And a lot of times I've come in with candidates and I've said, you're behind by 40 points, but I think we can win. And they'll be like, why? I said, well, the incumbent's hovering around 50. That's very bad for an incumbent. Likewise, Pete King in his last race in 2018, longtime congressman. I love Pete King's story was, Pete King, when I first worked for him in 1992, I said to him, well, where do you stand on term limits? Because we were going through the bunch of issues, checking out. He says, I'm for term limits. And I'll stay in Washington as long as it takes to get it passed. And sadly, he had to retire before it got passed. But, told you about Washington. But they always want to know their chances of winning. And in his last race in 2018, he was at 53%. And I said, after 28 years, that's a problem. He's like, I'm up leading the opponent. I said, yeah, but you're at 53 and everybody knows who you are. And it was going to be a bad year for the Republicans. So you need an experienced pollster to tell you your chances of winning. Lots of times people say, oh, the incumbent's up 45-25 over a challenger. 45 is a terrible number for an incumbent. I mean, because that means 55% is not voting for you and they're waiting to see who's running against you. Identify strengths and weaknesses to win. We ask simple questions in polls. What do you like most? What do you like least about candidates? Let the voters tell us. And you run on your strengths. Arnold, they mentioned that I worked for Arnold. When Arnold was running for governor of California, number one thing they said, he was strong. So when he ran, he had to do things like run around the state, blow up Volkswagens, and look strong every day because they wanted a strong governor. We also had to attack Gray Davis, who was the governor who had a 62 on Fairwell that we were recalling her. So you look for what they associate with your strengths and weaknesses to win. Cutting issues. It doesn't matter what the most important issue is, much as what issue gets you votes. When we're talking about what I mentioned, Anthony D'Esposito running against cashless bail against Laura Gillen, the year before, Ann Donnelly, the DA's race opened up. Chairman Cairo and the Conservative Party backed a woman named Ann Donnelly. Nobody knew who she was, 30-year career prosecutor. But when we asked in the polls what the top issues was, it was taxes, but it was followed by crime. And with crime, we found out that cashless bail was really unpopular. We put a torpedo in Todd Kaminsky with radio ads early on because we wanted that to be the top issue in the DA's race, and that would help the rest of our ticket. But it came from the survey. We knew the voters of Nassau County opposed cashless bail, and it really became a way for a lot of the people in this room to run successful campaigns while Lee Zeldin was running for governor. New York State crime is still the top issue, if not the top issue in the state, alongside of inflation and alongside of taxes and home corruption. And geez, such a good story to tell. But it's important to find out what issues get you votes. That's what a poll tells you. Key groups, coalitions to win, not just the usual groups. You're looking for, you heard Tom talking about younger voters. Certainly, we've got, you build a coalition. New York State, the Republicans are down 2-1. You need lots of reasons for Democrats to leave the Republicans and independent voters to join us. So that we can build a majority of 51%. Determine best allocation resources to win. One of the things I almost always ask in a poll is, what social media on every day? I mean, 80% of these voters are on Facebook. Are we winning the Facebook voters? They're on Instagram. They are on WhatsApp. We got to find out where they are. When Tom was talking about streaming, the voters under 40, they stream. What channels are they streaming? What are they watching? And the final reason to take a poll is politics is motion. You have to constantly show that you're gaining. You take one survey, people ask me, when do we poll again? After you spend enough money that you think you've moved votes. After you've spent enough organization resources with your volunteers that you've moved votes. So there's no reason to poll until you think you've made progress, and then you show that you've made progress. Next slide. Experience, when you're considering hiring a pollster, you should think about, have they done similar races like your own? I mean, we've worked for hundreds of members of Congress over the years. I'm really old. I don't want to tell Jason it's like not 35 years, it's over 40 years that I've been polling. So similar competitive races, similar regions of the country. Is the pollster accessible? I knew if Congressman Williams wanted to call me, he could get me any time. If he wanted to see me, that would happen. Who would work on the project? Who's reading your poll? And the consultants in his race, we were used to working with, and I could get Tom Dady and Jerry Kassar on the phone. We could do all sorts of things, make sure we beat the evil empire. Other clients in the state. It was really good that we had lots of clients in the state because I could tell when Lee Zeldin was doing his polls, I'd say, look, we just did a poll in Nassau, Suffolk, upstate. I could tell him what was going on in other areas in his race so that he could continue to move forward and continue to create coattails for our other clients. Chemistry, do you trust them? Are they team players? Those are all good things to know about a pollster. By the way, this presentation, Jerry has it. If he wants to share it with anybody, I'm sure he'll put it on his website that you could have it. Hints with working with your pollsters. Don't be intimidated. Tell them I don't agree with that. I don't, ask questions when you're any time in the process with the pollster. By the way, one of the things, I keep on bringing up Trump. A lot of times people tell me, oh, they're going to meet with Trump, and you're doing our polling. And I say, well, when Trump asks you if I'm a good pollster, you need to say yes, because he asks that all the time, even though he uses us. He said, they always check, and it's part of his routine. It's his nature. But tell your pollster everything if it doesn't matter. A lot of times I meet with candidates, and I'll be like, what should I know? And, it's like being a priest or rabbi, like Jerry will tell you that there's certain things you got to find out about because I hate surprises in a campaign. And then I usually assume I don't know everything, but then we find out. My brother Jim did his polling. So he was ahead by 13. He won by 8. So candidate resumes, these are things that you should share with the pollster. Before we write a draft questionnaire or a benchmark poll, we always say, I want to see your bios, your resumes. Why are you running? I love to ask why you're running. I love to ask that. What makes you think you can win while you're running websites? And you look, is there vulnerability research on the candidate? Is there opposition research? Candidate issues, vote history, et cetera, anything you can think of. We boil it down into the most important things because a lot of times in a poll you have to boil down what's nice to know and take that out and just what you need to know. And what you're looking for is any difference that makes a difference. I'll ask 40, 50 questions, but I'll say, see this? Everybody that was voting on taxes, you're ahead with it. I once had Jim Gilmore was running on taxes in Virginia for governor of Virginia, good example. And he was after George Allen. And taxes were only, because Georgia kept taxes down, it was only like 10% of the issues. So George had an idea, Jim Gilmore had an idea to run on abolishing the car tax in Virginia. And because there was a property tax on the cars that was like thousands of dollars, and people hated this tax. So we ran on no car tax, and we spent $1 million from like July 4th to Labor Day, and it went from being way down past education. The other thing was we were going to hire 4,000 new teachers. But education was the top issue with a third of the voters, and Don Beyer was ahead of us. By the time Labor Day rolled around, taxes were tied with education, and Jim Gilmore was ahead of Don Beyer, and he never looked back. So you kind of want to find out the issues that will make people vote for you. Let's go to the next slide. There is a science to polling, and it's not an exact science as we went through that math thing. You got to do random representative sampling, but you should be sampling. New York State, there's 13 million voters. And most voters don't vote, even in a presidential year. Not most, but a lot of voters don't vote. Millions of voters don't vote. God knows if they're there, but the Democrats keep them on the rolls. But so your pollster should be calling off of a voter list and should have the vote history on it, so to know what happens depending upon turnout. Like in an odd year, turnout's low. In an even year, it gets higher for governor, and then it gets higher for president. So you got to do a random sample within that. You build a model of who's going to come out. During the interviewings, the execution, New York State, we do interviews usually a third text to web, a third cell phones, and a third landlines. Sometimes we do less landlines because landlines are going extinct. When you see a poll that's done IVR, that means it's done on landlines, and they're calling most of the people over 65. So it's not a third landline, a third text, and a third cell phones. So in effect, because you're doing text to web, it's 2/3 cell phones. Sometimes you do more. Depends upon the population. You got to look at the population you want to poll for that given moment. And landlines are going extinct. A lot of voters are online like we do. I'll show you national numbers later. Those were done online because over 90% of the voters in the United States are online, whether it's a cell phone or computer or whatever. Strategy art, use the research to develop a campaign strategy, issue positions, contrast messages, media plans. That's what you get out of the poll. Next slide. This is really heavy now. Types of research. Most campaigns don't do all these types of research. Big statewide campaigns might. Quantitative research, benchmark poll. That's the first poll. That should have the most questions because you want to find out all the questions of the things, the reasons why you want to poll. A brush fire poll, that'll happen after like I said, after the Esposito. After he was down 10 points, we ran enough ads. Tom Dunham said, let's take another poll. He was up by a point. That was post-media. Tracking, you'd run tracking polls to make sure there's progress. Internet surveys, sometimes you do surveys on the internet because it's cheaper, panel surveys, et cetera. Text messaging surveys, I just mentioned. Mail surveys are stone age. People don't, the post office. Door-to-door canvassing, sometimes you have to do it in communities because you can't get people on the phone, but New York, you can pretty much get them on the phone. Qualitative research. The quantitative research tells you what the lay of the land looks like. The qualitative research says why. So if you find out that people have seen your TV ad, they're not voting for the candidate, sometimes you do focus groups of certain groups. Like a lot of times you'll do focus groups of women so men can find out what they don't ask. Like they sit home with their wives and they never ask them what's going on. So you have to do focus groups for men to watch women why they won't vote for their candidate. That's just an example. You do focus groups, Hispanic voters sometimes. You can do them online, you can do them in person, you can do online ad testing. We can send you an ad online and you can rate it. And then we get it back and we're like, I did this once for the governor of, I do these all the time, but did it once for the governor of Georgia, and he had his governor deal. He was there before Kemp. He had his wife in an ad, and it came back and was okay, but we said, this ad is the best ad to run attacking your opponent for being against charter schools, and that was the ad we spent the most money on. And he won re-election by 8 points. Text ad, messaging test, dial groups, internet, et cetera. You can do those online. Just give you an idea of types. Next slide. Before you go in the field, you got to set up a voter model. So New York State, just as an example, before we would do the surveys, based on past voter history of 2020 or say now in 2022, as I said, there's 13 million registered voters. In New York State, we had 8.2 million. And you can see 2/3 came out of New York City. Less so at the New York City media market. It was 30% in 2022 came out of the city. It's usually 34. So the Zeldin campaign did a good job of trying to get out the vote in the suburbs and upstate, but we needed about 2%, 2.5% more everywhere across the board to win. But you got to set up a model like this, because then on the right-hand side, you say in a 600 sample in New York State, that's how I'm determining the number of interviews by geography. Like we set up a model that we'll do the survey based on past history. We'll set it up by geography, by gender. We'll look at the racial components. We'll look at age. And if it's off from the typical turnout, that poll's going to be wrong. But usually the history of past elections in your area will tell you what it should be, even for primaries. Next slide. It doesn't matter, the margin of error, when you hear pollsters talk about margin of error, the science of statistics, it doesn't matter the size of the population, meaning if you do 13 million registered voters in New York State, you want to do registered voters, although that's necessarily a waste of money. If you do 1,000 samples, whether it's where I live in Rockland County, 1,000 samples, New York State, same margin of error, 19 times out of 20, the confidence interval plus or minus 3.1%. If it's 600, it's plus or minus 4. Typical congressional poll is 400 samples, is plus or minus 4.9. So I got a 10-point swing, 19 times out of 20. I'm in that. And every candidate wants me to be accurate within a 1/10 of a point. And 300 samples plus or minus 5.7. You get smaller than that, it's less of a... By the way, how many people here took statistics? Wow. You are really not normal people. And just remember, when you're talking to reporters about polls, none of them took statistics. Very few took statistics. Most of them took math for poets when they went, because they're good writers, but a lot of times they don't know anything about statistics. Okay. And just going through I'm going to run through these slides quickly, but as I said, Jerry has it. Questionnaire design, you got to have your screeners, you got to screen for likely voters, whether it's a primary or general informed messages, demos. Next slide. There's some rules here for questionnaire design. Simple, English, sometimes Spanish. We have a Spanish-speaking polling company. But keep it simple, concise. Open-end questions are things like, what do I like most about Brandon Williams? I'll ask that before I tell them about Brandon, because I don't want to bias them. I do want to have an accurate survey. Go from general to specific. If two questions are alike and bias each other, you want the questions that don't bias the other ones. So you really do get accurate information. A lot of these push polls you see in the media, like a lot of times they'll say, do you want a candidate like Trump or a candidate who isn't like Trump but just his policies? Why do they ask that before the ballot? They're biased. It's the media biasing the polls. But they do that. They could do that when they own the media. Next slide. Oh, well, one last thing on that other slide. If you can't prove it, don't test it. If you hear that your opponent's a sex offender and you want to ask it in a poll, I want to see the article and the criminal record before I ask that in a poll. So you can't say things about people that aren't true. Well, unless you're a Democrat, then you can do that. Types of questions, if Jerry gives you. And the last thing is, we have a group of slides. Just go to, you know what? Go to, let me see, the one about Trump versus, yeah, the last one. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Direction of the United States. Biden's job rating. Should have been worse. Hakeem Jeffries, he's got room to grow. He's not Nancy Pelosi yet. Next slide. Let's go, you know what? Yeah, go back to the one for Congress. When candidates, when I deliver a poll, I usually have like 1,000 pages of crosstabs that I've read to go through. And what I'm looking for is any difference that makes a difference. That's the national vote for Congress right now. Now, we got 51% nationally, but it wasn't all in the right districts. 94% of the Republicans were voting for the Republican. Democrats were voting for the Democrat, 87 to 8. Independents, slightly, 3-point edge. That means we got to work independents. But you're getting 26% of African Americans for Republicans, 36% for Hispanics. That's hopeful. Women were tied. Men were ahead by 10. Suburban area only ahead by 4. You're looking for those types of differences in the poll. That's why you look at 1,000 pages worth of research in a 50, 60 question survey to figure out what you should be doing to drive that vote total up. So with that, I know we're under a time constraint, and I know you want to text a lot of questions.